Well, Ethan, that brings us into our other topic today, which will lead us in to our prospect profiles. Um, and that is, we're going to be going over Alexandre Sarr, the French big man forward center who played in Australia last year, and then Donovan Clingan, UConn center who has been the starting center, I believe. At least was on the team the past 2 years, was definitely starting this year. Two-time national champion, UConn center Donovan Clingan. And because we're talking about those two today, me and Ethan thought of an idea that, or a topic that we could dive into that kind of ties in to the positions that these guys play. And it's something that we kind of talked about all year. It was also something that you and I advocated for before the season. And that was playing Wemby at the 4, for potential injury stuff. And also just that he has the skill set with his ball handling and his perimeter shooting, his perimeter defense. That obviously evolved throughout the season. But going into the year, that was our thought process, that because of all those strengths and skills that he has, that would be the best place for him. And you don't want him to necessarily get bullied inside, like against a Joel Embiid, which we did see how that went at one point this season. Now, with that being said, we are not saying that Victor is a bad defensive player whatsoever. Obviously, we just talked about how we both feel he should play the defensive player of the year, but I was just using the Joel game as an example of like what our thought process was and what we were kind of scared of going into the season. Obviously, that did not come to fruition whatsoever, which is awesome. But we did see some negatives when he was playing the 4. The key context, he was next to Zach Collins, which I hate to just put it that way, Ethan, but with the way that this season went, the jumps and the consistency that we, maybe thought we could see from Zach after the flashes we saw at the end of the 2022-2023 season, unfortunately, they just never really materialized. There were some injuries in there here and there, but really like him improving on the interior, that was something that we really harped on at the end of last season. And unfortunately, that just didn't really translate this year. I feel bad talking about this, just with our boy Zach, because there's a lot of things that, I feel like if everything went right for Zach, he really could be a solid backup 5. But unfortunately, things have just kind of gone the way that they've gone. Obviously, the nature of the team plays a part in this too. But what I'm getting at here, Ethan, is that Victor playing next to Zach, there might be a little bit of an asterisk there whenever it comes to evaluating him at the 4. And I could go down my whole spiel on that, but I kind of just set that up there. So I'm going to dish it to you, my guy, and give you my thoughts on or ask for your thoughts on that conversation.
Yeah, I think where that went wrong, and I didn't see it, so problems to me as well, but is like Zach's a 5, but he's a small 5, and what he's great at is like finesse play. So being at the high post, finding cutters, playing smart basketball, high IQ, footwork, etc., etc. He's not a powerful player. He's not an offensive rebounder. He's not a rim protector. He's not a great roller. He's not really a great screener. So when you put him next to Wemby, who kind of has similar weaknesses, like it didn't work. It almost just made both of their negatives worse, and they got in each other's way. So I think playing next to a different style of big might be effective for Victor, especially as he gets more comfortable with his ball handling, works on his balance, which he talked about in his interview inside the NBA, and kind of becomes more comfortable at that power forward spot. I think that there's room for him to play next to a bigger guy. Or if he gets more physical and we bring in a guy with kind of, I don't know how to put this, more ball handling capabilities, like more stretching the floor capabilities, but also is strong physical. I think that combination could work as well. But Zach Collins' weaknesses that I just outlined, plus his difficulty to hit the 3 ball this year, really made that experiment very, very bad. But I don't want that to infiltrate or to ruin the possibility of a different combination that could potentially work, especially like if that draft pick, which is I think what we're getting at, were
Yes.
to become available to us.
Yeah, and not to just keep harping on the Timberwolves, Ethan, but we've seen how year 2 of Cat and Rudy has played out too.
Mhm.
There were a lot of questions about that. I dismissed it completely after last season. I'm like, why are they? I mean, yeah, they didn't have like a god awful year last year, but I wasn't expecting what happened this season, the jumps that they made, which really you could look at this honestly in all sports, Ethan.
Mhm.
Sometimes it really just does like take a year of playing together and working out the kinks to really unlock something. I'm not gonna I hate to bring this up, Ethan, but I'm gonna use this example. It's a different sport. But in 2018, LSU had essentially the same roster that they had in 2019. And in 2018, Joe Burrow didn't throw a touchdown in the entire month of October. Okay.
Mhm.
And then after a year of, everybody getting completely healthy, getting the chemistry down in the off season, like I said, I know this is a different sport, but it's kind of similar to the Timberwolves right now. Obviously, we'll see if the Timberwolves can end up, finishing this out and winning the finals. There's a long way to go for there. I'm not saying that's necessarily going to happen, but the point that I'm making here is sometimes you need to give things time before you just completely dismiss them, working. Where
Mhm.
like I said, I opened this up with like I was still dismissive of the Timberwolves even after last year, and obviously, and I'm not the only one, but a lot of people are getting proven wrong on how they felt about them and the whole Rudy Cat thing. But that also ties into this big conversation, and it shows that in the modern NBA, you can play two bigs and be successful. And in fact, it's probably one of the key things that, is giving them an advantage in a lot of these series, especially when you have to go up against a player like Jokic on the interior.
Right, right. I think it all comes down to matchups, honestly. Like there are certain players, and I think we're about to talk about one that may be difficult to play with Wemby in some cases against some teams, but against a guy like Jokic, against a big team like Minnesota, it could be the difference between a win and a loss. Honestly, having a guy like that next to Victor to kind of take some of that physicality.
Yeah, I'm gonna. This is, I swear, Ethan. This is the last thing I'm gonna say about the Timberwolves, but it just ties into this conversation. I saw a tweet from NBA University today, and it says, "Imagine being a guard and you're getting picked up 94 feet by Jaden McDaniels, and
Mhm.
then when he gets tired, you get picked up 94 feet by Nikhil Alexander Walker, and Anthony Edwards is ready to jump your pass lane every time you drive, and then on top of that, there's two 7-footers in the paint."
Right, right. And going back to last year for Minnesota, this is becoming a Minnesota
I know.
podcast, but like they lost to Denver in the playoffs last year. I think they got swept, or it was like a
Something like
five-game
that.
series.
Yeah.
But two significant injuries that no one talks about. Jaden McDaniels wasn't playing that series because he broke his hand, and Nas Reed wasn't playing that series either. Those are both big dudes. So they basically added two more big dudes that can play defense to their lineup. And now that they have them, it's basically wraps at this point.
And both of those guys can shoot too.
Yeah, right. Nas Reed especially.
So, anyways, the whole reason I bring that up is I think that's, I was kind of, as the season gone on and the success that we saw with Victor at the 5, I became less and less like, what's the word, attracted to that idea of like bringing another big in next to him. But I think it's not just like what I'm seeing from the Timberwolves, it's also the Zach aspect of this that we discussed as well. And when you factor in that, I think that's really the key point. But then also, like you're seeing what the Timberwolves are doing right now, and they're a team with two 7-footers on the floor at the same time. Like I said earlier, that shows that this is an effective thing, or this is
Mhm.
a thing that can be effective in the modern NBA.
Right. I think it all comes down to Zach, unfortunately, and I hate to say that, but I think he is the weak point that makes the too big argument not work. And it's not even the too big argument. I just think that he and Victor aren't compatible really.
Yeah,
Even I hate to say this, even as
right.
a backup for Wemby, because if Wemby's your starting center, ideally your backup center offers you something that he doesn't, and the only thing Victor doesn't give you is like physicality, strong, big that can roll and get rebounds. That's pretty much it. And Zach doesn't do either of those things.
Well, Ethan, you know what I think would fix it?
Hmm.
Victor's comment right here. It's coming from the horse's mouth.
Oh yeah,
Bring back Boban. Boban and Wemby would be fire. I think that really the Wemby Boban HEB commercials would be
Mm,
insane.
that would be kind of crazy. The two of them playing limbo
Oh,
would be crazy.
they need to hire you, Ethan. That's a
I,
good idea.
creative marketing genius is all I'm saying.
In all seriousness, though, a physical presence next to Victor,
Hmm.
um, I don't know how else to put this, Ethan, but that is just not Zach Collins.
Hmm.
There are some appeals and I think some things, and maybe like, I know I'm stopping myself mid sentence here. Maybe just for total speculative talk, Ethan, maybe we draft one of these guys that we're talking about. And then it just doesn't work out the way that we thought it did. And we realize at the end of this season, like, okay, wow, no, he just needs to be playing the five.
Hmm.
But like we just said with the Zach point, I don't think that you can like make a definitive, point on that conversation after this year.
Right. I would agree with that statement.
And here's another thing, Ethan, that we forgot about. Wemby did play with a big later in the season. And I forget about this. He's not necessarily a center, but old boy White Dog Skater says Sandro Mamu.
I thought, oh my god, I thought when you said white dog skater, that's what your nickname for Mamu was.
No, no,
Oh
no, no,
boy,
no, no.
white dog skater. Oh
No,
my
that's
god.
just who's in our comments for
Yeah.
those of y'all on podcast. But I mean, I know this is not Klingon or Sar whatsoever, but
Right.
I think Mamu's success, like having a 21-10 game against the Nuggets in a win, late in the season when the Nuggets were playing everybody, like I think that's an example. And that wasn't the only game where Mamu went off. He did well really throughout the end of the season playing next to Victor. But that's an example of how, he's really a true four.
Hmm.
And I'll read the rest of this comment in a second. But that's an example of a big playing well next to him, them playing off of each other and fitting better together.
Hmm.
Obviously, I think Sarah Klingon is going to play the five, but still, I think that's another actually like a relevant aspect to this conversation. But he says Mamu going to have a lot of playing time next season. We'll see if he's on the roster, but he's going to be one of those dudes that could sub out for Sohan at the four, and we got our two big lineup. Problem solved. I don't think Mamu is a fluke either. I see your comment here, White Dog. Mamu is not a fluke IMO. He could be our next Boris Diaw / our own Nas Reed.
Mm.
What I will say, and me and Ethan have talked about this, we definitely think he could be the backup for on the Spurs team, right?
Right. Absolutely.
But I do not know if Mamu is, I'm not ready to say that Mamu is the answer at the four,
Hmm.
to solve the front court problems. But he did bring up Jeremy Sohan, which is another aspect of this conversation, Ethan. And I want to move on from this here in a second because we are in a little bit of time crunch. So I want to make sure that we give, a
Hmm.
good 15 minutes to Sar and Klingon respectively. Um, but at the same time, what are your thoughts on Jeremy Sohan in this conversation, I guess is what I'm asking.
I think Jeremy Sohan is a starting power forward until further notice. That's all I'm going to say. Like, if we were to draft Sar, let's just say that happens.
Right.
Um, there is an argument to be made that Jeremy Sohan becomes a starting small forward if that were to happen. Honestly, like knowing Pop, and we played him at the point guard last year, so nothing's out of the question. Right now, the starting small forward is going to be Julian Champagny at this time and moment. But at the same time, we've seen in history that he can come off the bench if that is going to be a requirement. And unfortunately, that pushes Mamu probably out of being on the team next year if
Hmm.
that were to happen. But um, that's all I'm going to say. He is the starting power forward until that becomes a problem.
And this ties into a theme, Ethan. Unfortunately, that we've talked. Well, unfortunately or fortunately, however you want to look at it, that we've talked about really since last offseason. Now that Victor's on the team, kind of everything's off. We're going to do whatever is the best decision for the team. And if
Right.
that's taking a Klingon or a SAR, and maybe they don't do any of this at all, but that's the point of the offseason is to talk about all these scenarios. If they take a Klingon or a SAR, they might just be like, hey, you're going to be our sixth man now, Jeremy. You
Hmm.
know, that's the role we want you to play off the bench. But, I don't think that the three is completely out of the question either. Like you mentioned, the only thing that, of course, comes into play with that is the shooting question. Obviously,
Absolutely.
we know that that's Jeremy's main focus this offseason. He said it in the exit interview. But that would be something that, could potentially, not be the greatest fit if you move him to the 3. But
Mhm.
with all of that being said, Ethan, there's one more person that we got to talk about because I saw it in the comments too. Charles Bassey. Here's what I'll say on that. Oh boy, Charles, I think right now, with his contract and what we've seen from him, I'm not saying that he couldn't be a really solid backup center. Maybe he could, but I think right now Charles is probably slated as the third string 5, especially coming off that injury, um,
Mhm.
going into the season.
I would just say I agree with that statement. I hope that he's more along than we're giving him credit for, but that's where I envision him as well.
Yeah, so I understand like why people are asking because he showed some flashes. He is a physical presence. Like I
Mhm.
like I like Charles Bassey a lot. I love the contract he's on for 4 years, 2 million. I think with the last 2 years being team options. But I think if we have a chance to draft some of the guys that we're talking about, they're just gonna bluntly have a higher ceiling than our boy Chuck Bass.
Chuck Bass. XOXO.